Cool. So I might share my screen and we can go from there. Cool. So can you see my browser?
Yes.
Cool. So this is GitHub ZAP Proxy. And there's two projects here that are important for us. One is ZAP Proxy, the other is ZAP Extensions. And combined, they are ZAP. So essentially, if I look at their code base, which I've installed on my machine, and you kind of have to, there's this big, massive document for how to do this. It's quite complicated. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. But there's a ZAP Proxy directory here with all the source in it. And there's also a ZAP Extensions, which is that other project I was talking about. Now, ZAP Extensions has this add-ons directory. Whoops. And every directory under this add-ons directory is a ZAP extension and is deployed as a jar file with a version. Now, their release cycle, they have like this alpha release, they have a beta release, and then they have a normal release, which represents the stability of the release. So for example, for alert filters, I think you could have like a version 9 release and a version 10 beta release as an example. I don't know that for sure though, so don't quote me on that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, where should we start with this? I'm going to show you I'm going to run the ZAP image that DAST depends on and just show you their folder structure, and we'll see where this goes. So this is the Docker image that DAST depends on. I've started a container and I'm just in their ZAP directory. Can you see is this font big enough?
It's good.
So if I just see what code they have, this is all their code mashed together in their deployable well, the way they deploy it. If I look at this plugin directory, you can see all the released ZAP files, which I believe are jar files. I'm not really sure what they do with them. They've got their own extension, but they're tarred and then renamed, or I'm not really sure exactly what they do. So as an example, the Ajax Spider, which is the guy that actually kicks off a Firefox browser and scans a website using browser, therefore it understands JavaScript, is version 23.2.0. That we would find the same directory in here, I would assume. What was it called? Spider Ajax? Boom. So that's that guy. Now what happens when ZAP runs if I just run, so I'm just going to run their scripts, so not the DAST scripts that run on top of this, just their own ones. I've set up a really simple server locally. And we'll see what happens with their plugins. So I can show you what ZAP does. So you'll notice one thing here, it passes, when it starts the ZAP server, it starts add-on update. And it's run the scan, and that's cool. But there's actually a zap.out log, which is the ZAP servers log file. And if we go in here, we get a bit more information. You can see it's initializing all these things. It's loading all these passive scan rules. It's initializing a bunch more stuff. And then here, it's got an extension loader. Sorry, too early. Here we go. It's got an extension auto update. And you can see it says, finished installing new add-on pscan rules version 28.0.0. Add-on downloaded. And it's downloaded the passive scan rules release version 28 and the passive scan rules beta version 22. I'm not sure why the version number's gone down, but it only updates the latest. Any questions so far?
Well, looks good.
Makes sense.
So basically when ZAP released their own image, they've baked in some plugins themselves, and every time ZAP executes, it goes and finds out what plugins need updating, and it updates them, and then it runs the scan. Now, in order to do that, it actually hits, I think it's this URL. This is in their code base, which takes you here, and you can see this stuff like, they've defined an add-on alert report, and somewhere there will be a URL for that. Here we go. And you can see there's a URL. So that's what they're doing. They're going and looking at alert report. They're looking at what version they have. They load this file from the internet. They see if there's a newer version. If there is, they install it. Make sense? So what we want to do as a way of, well, there's two reasons why we want to bake these plugins into DAST. The first is performance. So every time you run a scan, you shouldn't have to go and download the whole internet just to get an up-to-date version of the vulnerability definitions. And that's particularly useful as well if you're running an offline installation, because you can't do that. The second reason is that we've had situations where a plugin has been downloaded. So imagine DAST released, and then ZAP later released a new version of the plugin, and then someone ran DAST and it broke DAST. So we haven't had the opportunity to test the plugins with DAST in that situation, because it didn't run through our pipeline and our tests didn't execute. So in theory, our tests would have found it. So what we do is this. If I go to our Docker file, can you guys see this?
Can I ask you a quick question, Cal?
Yeah.
Do you have any idea why ZAP doesn't sort of version these updates as part of the Docker image?
I suspect it's because they want the release cycle of the vulnerabilities to be different to the release cycle of their Docker image. So as an example, the Docker image would probably change less, the vulnerabilities would change more often.
That makes sense.
But I don't know the complete answer to that. Actually, too, we depend on this weekly version of the ZAP Docker image. That's actually an unstable version of their container or their image that they release. The stable one, version 2.9.0, I think is the latest. I think it was probably updated, what, 4 or 5 months ago or something, and before that it was updated 2 years ago. So I suspect that's the reason, although I don't have the full context. Anything you want to add so far, Craig?
Nope.
Cool. So you can see in our Docker image, the first thing we do is we extend their Docker image, and then we go and pretty much download every single version of the plugins that we want, with the exact version, and with the release and the beta and all that kind of stuff. We even install stuff we probably don't care about. WebDriver for Mac OS, we're probably never going to use. But when we, and Windows is the same, but when we actually did this pinning of the versions, I wanted to use exactly what they had. So I just took exactly what they had, just as a way of minimizing risk. Now, to make sure that they don't always update that version, to give us a bit of control, we actually find and replace in their code add-on update and add-on install. You can see these guys. And that gives us control to say, yes, we want to allow you to update the plugins, or no, you have to use the ones that are baked in with our image. So that's the current state of play. We have pinned images, they work. You can turn it off. There's a configuration option, which is like add-on. Yeah, this is set to true by default still. But if you go DAST, /analyze, auto update add-ons false, it will use the plugins that are pinned in our Docker image, and it won't allow ZAP to update them, which is good. The only downside to this approach is that it forces us to manually go and update them when there are new vulnerability definitions, which is what this video is about.
So I've got a quick question that I think I misunderstood something. So right now, auto updates are happening by default, unless you specify that you don't want them to happen.
There's an issue that says change it to false.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So, but that means at any time DAST could break.
Correct.
Is that okay? Cool.
Yeah. Realistically, the place that's most likely to break it are these guys.
Right. Which
And
we're not using.
Well, we are. So so these guys install Firefox, and in particular, we're only using that one because we run Linux.
Right.
And the Spider Ajax depends on Firefox being installed. And this is only we've only detected that it's been broken once before. And how this broke was this plugin was updated, and then the DAST auto login functionality, which also depends on the Firefox being installed, somehow wasn't able to launch Firefox. I've forgotten the full details, but for me at least, this is the biggest risk in terms of actually it breaking. So it's probably not super critical, but it's still good practice.
So there's an issue coming up that's upgrade Firefox. So that's a risky issue. Yeah,
and that's actually a difficult issue because Firefox has started from ZAP and it's started from DAST, depending on the different functionality. And both of those will have to add a new configuration option to allow proxy servers, which is a new configuration security setting introduced by Firefox and will likely cause an upstream change in ZAP. So that sounds easy, but that's actually quite difficult.
Yeah, cool, fun.
Yeah. But say, for example, that ZAP fixed it on their side, and then they released another WebDriver Linux version of the extension, that could quite possibly break DAST.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Cool. So I should say that I've only ever updated. So this exercise happened where we pinned all these versions. Only once have I gone and updated the versions. But I'll show you what I did, or at least what I would do. So the first thing is this log file, right, which I showed you, which is the ZAP log file. It's called zap.out. When you run ZAP, there's two processes, right? There's the Python and there's the ZAP server, which is Java. Two processes essentially means there's two log files. The Java log file for the ZAP server is basically printed to zap.out in the directory that you're in when you execute the scan. And when this all runs on GitLab, we actually mash the two log files together in it. So you get all the output, but it's also quite horrible. But in this zap.log, you can when you run it, you can see the latest versions it's picking up. I ran this with the ZAP image, but I think I'm going to run it with DAST now. So in theory, right, I build a new DAST image, and then I docker run -ti. Cool. So I've got DAST. It's got all our pinned images. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a analyze script for the same URL. It doesn't matter what it is, although it does matter that it's got the correct address. That's right. And after this, we're just going to go into the zap.out log file. We're going to look at, or actually it's printed out here. We're going to look at what gets downloaded. And then we're just going to go into our Docker file and change the version number. So you can see here, add-on downloaded to pscan release 28. and add-on downloaded Selenium release 15.2. And to be honest, I don't actually care about the rest of the scan right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to, well, actually, I'm going to go and look in this. So this guy, in theory, we should be able to find pscan rules release 28, which is the file which is the version of the pscan passive scan rules that was downloaded. We're going to find the URL. And in our Docker file where we install pscan rules release, we're going to use the new version of 28. Does that make sense? Thumbs up.
Yeah, total sense. One quick question. So if I ran an end-to-end test baseline scan, that would give me the ZAP log file, wouldn't it, and the output?
An end-to-end test. Yes.
I'm just thinking of the least number of key presses to get this log file.
Yep. So you could go and so when you run a test locally, there's this output directory. You could go into, webgo fullscanlog.log and you will see the same thing. Although it will be mixed with the client log.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is horrible. So this may be easier.
Yeah.
But you get the point.
That was easier than I thought.
Well, maybe you could start with a possibly not the most complicated test in now on.
Just my thinking was that maybe we could run an end-to-end test, grab the results, and run a script over it to find the new Ajax, the new plugins.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, whatever the mechanism, I certainly think it's possible to automate, not necessarily changing our Docker file, but at least have a job in our build or in our pipeline that tells us which ones to update, what the URLs
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Definitely, I think that's possible. But it would be useful if you guys can come to your own conclusion on that, because you'll have your own ideas after this.
Yeah, cool.
So that's the easy version. I should say too, one thing I haven't shown you is this ZAP extensions in GitHub has releases. And so in theory, right, FuzzDB should be updated to version 6. Passive scanner rules, which is the one we just looked at, is now version 28. You can see here what's changed. And the reason that's useful is because after you change this, you're going to have to rebuild DAST, run all your tests, and the expectation files are going to change because the vulnerability definitions are different, right? So that's just something to be aware of.
Cool.
Now, so I would say that's the minimum to do in terms of installing new vulnerability definitions. We can go further and we can update the version that we depend on in terms of the Docker image. I don't know if I recommend this or not right now. It's good in the sense that they will fix issues and stuff, but presumably they'll also introduce them. So if we look at the latest, it's week 2024-27. So we're a little bit behind. It's also a little bit more complicated because do you remember when I did a directory listing of the plugin directory? So some of these plugins, you can't download them. They're not released properly. They seem to come with ZAP. So one of the challenges we have is when we update the Docker weekly image, we need to make sure that we've got all the plugins accounted for in a sense. So what this essentially means is if you were to update this to the latest version of the Docker image, you should run it. You should do a directory listing of that plugin directory and just make sure that we're downloading all the images, all the versions they have. Like, we're not capturing the unknown plugins that we haven't got in this list.
If we miss a plugin, do our tests catch it? Or
it all depends. It depends what the plugin is. I mean, given how big and how complicated ZAP is, I would say that it's very unlikely that our test will catch it.
right.
But if it's something that's really core, then our tests will catch it. But things like, things like the heads-up display and the help, like eventually I think we can clean this up and just get rid of the plugins because we probably don't, ZAP server can probably run without them and we never use them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But things like, where is it? The replacer, right? So this guy can replace headers and response bodies and gives you a lot of fine-grained control over what the proxy can and can't do when it's actually proxying requests. And we basically don't use this ourselves, but it doesn't mean that our customers don't. So if we left this one out, we might be like, tests pass, but our customers might be unhappy.
Right. Okay.
So yeah, I think
I'm just trying to work out how to know if we did a good job when we upgrade.
I mean, the tests are good enough, I think, but
Okay.
it's not going to catch everything.
Cool.
I think that I think we'd have to run like a 5-hour test suite to catch everything. There's just so much to test. So
how would you write that test suite?
I mean, just write hundreds of test cases. Get to understand every plugin in and out.
I understand. Right.
You know, pass all the options that we expect to work to the ZAP server and verify that they did work.
Right.
And, you know, maybe in 5 years, if DAST is still around, maybe that's what we have.
Yeah.
But we're a long way from that.
Yeah, I think my question was, can we write that test? But the answer is no. Not
I don't think so. One thing I haven't mentioned actually is that, so when I ran this example to see what had changed, the P scanner rules which were updated. So these guys, right? And these guys. Although I didn't introduce the 2022 here, but it needs updating as well. Now, because I ran the baseline scan, which only is a passive scan in ZAP, it didn't actually try and update any of the active scan rules, which are these guys. So when whoever does this is probably better off running a full scan, just to make sure that we've captured the active scans as well. And it may even be worthwhile running a open API scan in case that's been updated.
So if we were to automate this, it might be useful to run all scans, all the end-to-end tests, grab all the logs, work out everything that came through, and that would be the upgrade.
I don't think we'll ever be able to automate the upgrade itself, but I think we'll be able to automate a job.
Identifying what needs upgrading.
Precisely, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, and even that might not be perfect, but it would still be pretty good.
Yeah.
So don't forget too, you can, if you need more information, you can just go through here. So you know FuzzDB probably should be version 6. I don't know why it's version 12, but there you go. But you can also go to you could also go to this, search for fuzz. Here's the add-on. And then you can see, so that's version 12, which is the same. So you can see that that's up to date. But that's another way you can do it if you don't want to run ZAP. Yeah.
Do you think,
but I think that's
it might make sense? Sorry to interrupt. Do you think it might make sense to at some point represent this in a data structure, so it's maybe easier to sort of determine if there is a delta between what we've got and what we expect to have?
Yeah, and I considered doing that when I first wrote this, but time constraints, I just didn't. But I think if we ended up writing that job to automate telling us what needs updating, I anticipate that there would be some data structure which represents, you know, these plugins and what version we depend on.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Good old time constraints.
It's a bit confusing because like there's a lot of exceptions in this. Like it looks just like looking at this from afar, you think, oh yeah, this is all fairly consistent, but it's definitely not. Like, you know, why is directory list v1? Why does that have a v4 at the end? When, you know, you look at something like the HUD and it's like coming from a completely different repository and it's got a completely different style. So that's why I didn't do that initially. But yeah, I definitely think that's worth doing. The other thing that's worth doing is documenting how we do it. But as long as, I guess the first step is us all knowing how.
Where would that documentation be?
Personally, I would put it in the DAST docs in our DAST repository.
Oh, the README? Or
I'd probably link to it from the README, but there's a doc directory, I think. This guy. Where are we? This guy. I'd put it in here.
okay.
But, I mean, other people might have a different idea about that.
That makes sense. So it's a good place to start.
Yeah. I think as a start, like we just get the documentation, or at least, I guess as a start, we make sure other people apart from me can do it, and then we can document it.
Awesome.
Easy peasy.
Cool.
Who's going to actually do it?
I think I'm the sacrificial lamb.
Lucky thing. Well, feel free to build a data structure if you think that's best.
I think
what issue is it?
What was the question?
What issue is it? I'm pretty sure it's the issue that you were assigned, wasn't it, Philip?
It is, yeah. Let me, I'll put it.
I'm wondering because maybe it's got to wait, maybe.
The wait is 1.
Okay.
But I made the wait and I kind of regret it. Well, let me say this. Our weights are a representation of how complicated we think the work is and therefore how long it will take to do. Not captured in that weight is the risk of that weight changing. And I would say this is fairly risky in the sense that it's very easy to make the change, to find out what plugins to update, and it's very easy to update them. But what's going to break? You know, you've got no idea. And it's the same with updating the ZAP Docker weekly image. Like, it's very easy just to plug in a new variable for a week, for a version, but what's going to break? Yeah. So I wouldn't stress too much about the weight. Yeah. There's a lot of value in doing it. So.
Yeah. So it's probably worth writing an implementation plan, something similar to make the change, see if it works, and then maybe iterate on that with the script if you want.
Yeah, I think that's probably a way of reducing the risk.
And so once this is actually done, how will I actually validate that it's done what I think it's done?
Just
or that it hasn't introduced anything.
So you need to run your tests. and they're all presumably, if the vulnerability definitions have been updated and our tests are testing something that is related to what's been updated in the definitions, then your tests will fail. And you need to go through each test. Like, I mean, what I do is basically I essentially just go like test docker build.-t DAST and test end-to-end. I can't see the screen. What have I done?
I don't think it's test end-to-end. I think it's just end-to-end. Yeah.
Thank you. So say I run the baseline test, right? Oh, damn it.
Did you do a prune? Oh, are you inside the Docker instance?
No, what happened is I actually did update the Docker file, right? So it's going and downloading everything. But what will happen is you'll end up with report tests, say this guy, which is one of the tests in that file. And you'll end up with this guy, right? So you just use your compare tool. And I mean, in my case, I haven't run it since Craig's RD update, but you just go and look at all the changes and you verify that the change makes sense according to what has been released.
And maybe just a follow-up question. Say a customer has a vulnerability on their dashboard. Can this change any of the sort of identifiers or how that's represented so that, you know, maybe it looks different, so they might get a duplicate? Is that sort of thing possible when these definitions change?
It is possible. So if I just go to the end, I always forget this thing. It's in here somewhere. This guy. So this lists the definitions of the vulnerabilities. So every vulnerability has an ID and a name. So as an example, this vulnerability, which is the anti-mime sniffing header, X content type options, blah, 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 has the plugin ID 121. Theory that should be in here. Now what can happen is they do this, right? Where they deprecate it and then create new ones. And if they were to do that, so if there was a previous DAST scan that found this, that found this one, and then we did the upgrade, and then they did another DAST scan, and it found this one, it would say you fixed one vulnerability and you found one new vulnerability. So we have no way of moving that definition across right now, and no one's even talked about it because there may not even necessarily be a one-to-one mapping when that does actually happen.
Yeah, that's true.
Does that answer your question?
Yep, that's perfect.
Sweet. Cool. Well, I don't think I have too much more to show you, unless you have more questions.
Nope, thank you. That was brilliant.
Cool. That's fun.
Yeah, cheers, Cam.
It's nice to have other people around doing it. So thank you. Ping me if you guys have any issues, though.
Sounds
cool.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Thank you. Catch you later.
See you guys.
so